Have you ever noticed that your voice sounds a little rougher by 9 at night, for no reason you can explain? Or that a dry, nagging cough shows up right after dinner, almost like clockwork, and disappears by morning as if it never happened? If you have spent months chasing that feeling with lozenges, allergy pills, or a specialist who found nothing wrong on a scan, what you are about to hear may finally connect the dots no one else has connected for you. There is a woman I will call Elena, because her real name does not matter, but her story does. For nearly 2 years she cleared her throat so often that her coworkers started to notice. She saw an allergist. She saw a pulmonologist. She had a chest X-ray that came back spotless. Every test said her lungs were fine, her sinuses were fine, her heart was fine. And yet the cough kept returning every single evening, like something waiting for the lights to go down. Nobody in 2 years asked her a single question about her stomach. That detail is the reason this video exists, because the organ responsible for her cough was never anywhere near her throat. It was sitting quietly, 1 floor below, doing something it was never built to do. Elena told me later that the strangest part was not the cough itself. It was how confidently everyone reassured her. Clean scans. Clear lungs. A doctor who told her kindly that some coughs just linger, and there is not always an answer. She almost believed that. Most people in her position would have. Most people already know the obvious version of this story. The burning sensation behind the breastbone after a heavy meal. The sour taste that creeps up the back of the throat late at night. That is the reflux everyone recognizes, the one that has its own aisle in the pharmacy. But there is a second, quieter version of this condition, one that rarely announces itself with burning at all. It shows up instead as a scratchy throat, a tired voice by evening, a cough that seems to have no cause, or a strange sensation of something sitting in the throat that never quite clears. Doctors have a name for this. They call it silent reflux, and it is estimated to affect a meaningful share of adults who never once suspect their stomach is involved, largely because the classic warning sign, heartburn, is often completely absent. To understand what was actually happening to Elena, you first need to understand a small, unglamorous muscle that most people will go their entire lives never thinking about. It sits exactly where your esophagus meets your stomach, and its job is almost embarrassingly simple. It opens for a second or two when you swallow, and then it closes, sealing the stomach shut so that acid, food, and enzymes stay exactly where digestion needs them to stay. Physiologists call it the lower esophageal sphincter. You can think of it, more usefully, as a one-way valve, the kind of mechanism you never notice until the day it stops working the way it should. When that valve holds firm, you never feel it. That silence is actually the sign of a healthy digestive system. The moment you become aware of your stomach most of the time is the moment something down there has already gone slightly wrong. Reflux begins the instant that valve starts opening at the wrong times, or fails to close all the way. This is not usually a dramatic failure. It is rarely one single event you could point to. It tends to be gradual, almost architectural, the way a door with a worn-out hinge stops latching cleanly over years of use, rather than breaking all at once. And several everyday factors quietly wear down that hinge. Carrying extra weight around the midsection increases pressure from below, pushing up against the valve continuously, even while you sleep. Fatty, rich meals relax the muscle directly, which is part of why a heavy dinner so often precedes a rough night. Overeating stretches the stomach and forces the valve to stay propped open longer than it was designed for. Alcohol and caffeine both relax that same muscle on contact. And in a meaningful number of people, a structural condition called a hiatal hernia allows part of the stomach to shift slightly upward through the diaphragm, which makes the valve mechanically harder to keep sealed, almost independent of anything they eat or drink. There is also a reason this tends to surface more often as people move past their 50s and 60s than it did in their 30s. Muscle tone throughout the body changes gradually with age, and the tissue in this valve is not exempt from that process. Connective tissue around the diaphragm loosens slightly over the decades as well, which is part of why hiatal hernias become more common later in life. None of this reflects a failure on anyone's part. It reflects a small muscle that has been working continuously, without a single day off, for 6 or 7 decades. This is the point where Elena's case stopped making sense to everyone who examined her, and it is where the real explanation begins. When that valve fails often enough, or badly enough, the acid that escapes does not always stop at the esophagus. Sometimes it travels further, especially at night, when a person is lying flat and gravity is no longer helping the valve hold its position. Acid can rise high enough to reach the very back of the throat, and in some cases the airway itself. Clinicians describe these as extraesophageal symptoms, meaning symptoms that appear outside the esophagus entirely in places most people, and even some doctors outside gastroenterology, do not automatically associate with digestion. This is what a chronic, unexplained evening or nighttime cough can actually be. It is also one possible explanation behind a persistent urge to clear your throat, a voice that sounds tired or hoarse by the end of the day, recurring laryngitis that never seems to respond to the usual treatments, or that strange, hard-to-describe sensation of a lump sitting in the throat that will not go away. Some people wake abruptly at night gasping, with no clear trigger they can identify. Others notice their asthma symptoms worsening for no obvious reason, their inhaler doing less than it used to. Researchers have also documented a real, if complicated, relationship between reflux and disrupted breathing during sleep, one that has led many specialists to start asking about digestion whenever a patient reports unexplained nighttime breathing trouble, rather than only asking about the airway itself. There is a biological logic behind the cough itself, and it explains why it can feel so relentless. When acid reaches the back of the throat, it triggers a small protective reflex, a muscle spasm designed to stop that acid from traveling any further toward the lungs. In the moment, it works exactly as intended, but repeated night after night, that same protective spasm becomes its own quiet source of exhaustion for a body that is supposed to be resting, not defending itself. This is the part of Elena's story that finally made sense of everything. Her cough wasn't a lung problem. It was acid reaching her throat while she slept night after night, irritating tissue that had no natural defense against that kind of repeated exposure. 3 specialists had examined nearly everywhere except the one place that mattered. She has since told me she used to lie awake some nights wondering if it was something she had imagined. What makes this especially easy to miss is that the burning sensation most people associate with reflux and the cough or hoarse voice that shows up somewhere else entirely are not 2 separate problems. They are the same mechanical failure, expressed in 2 different locations. One valve not closing the way it should quietly connects them both. So the natural next question becomes, what is happening while you sleep that makes this worse, in the hours when you have the least awareness and the least control over your own body? The single most effective adjustment, according to most clinical guidance on this condition, has nothing to do with medication at all. It involves raising the head of the bed itself, not stacking extra pillows, which tends to bend the neck into an angle that creates its own discomfort over time. The more effective approach is raising the actual frame of the bed by roughly 4 to 6 inches using sturdy risers so the entire upper body rests on one gentle, consistent incline. It sounds small, but that one change means gravity spends the whole night working with the valve instead of against it, instead of doing nothing for 8 hours straight. Timing matters nearly as much as position. Giving the stomach real time before lying down, generally avoiding solid food for about 3 hours before bed, and easing off liquids in the final couple of hours reduces how much pressure is pushing against the valve at exactly the moment the body's defenses are weakest. And somewhat counterintuitively, eating smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day tends to more than eating fewer, larger ones, because a heavily stretched stomach is a stomach that demands more from a valve that may already be struggling to keep up. Posture after eating plays a quieter role that is easy to underestimate. Staying upright for 15 to 20 minutes after a meal, rather than settling onto a couch or reaching for an afternoon nap, keeps gravity briefly on your side during the exact window when the stomach is at its fullest. And two familiar habits, smoking and regular alcohol use, tend to produce some of the most noticeable improvement when reduced within a matter of weeks rather than months, according to patterns seen across gastroenterology practice. Beyond lifestyle, there is a category of everyday medication that rarely gets mentioned in the same breath as reflux, and this is worth understanding rather than reacting to. Certain anti-inflammatory pain relievers can irritate the stomach lining directly, particularly with frequent use rather than occasional use. Some blood pressure medications relax smooth muscle throughout the body as part of how they work, and that relaxing effect is not selective. It can reach the same valve responsible for keeping acid contained. Certain sedatives produce a similar relaxing effect, and some older classes of antidepressants can slow digestion in ways that give acid more time and more opportunity to move upward. None of this is a reason to stop taking a prescribed medication on your own. It is a reason to bring a simple, honest list to your next appointment, noting what you take and when your symptoms tend to flare, because that pattern often communicates more to a physician than a general description of heartburn ever could. Food plays its own role, and the list of common triggers is more specific and occasionally more surprising than most people expect. Mint, chili and bell peppers, tomato-based sauces, chocolate, carbonated drinks, dark coffee, black tea, cured and processed meats, and energy drinks all appear repeatedly among people who experience frequent symptoms. One habit worth mentioning on its own is drinking strongly caffeinated beverages on a completely empty stomach first thing in the morning, a ritual many people have followed for years without ever questioning it, and one that tends to be a surprisingly reliable trigger in people already prone to reflux. There is also a mechanical factor that has nothing to do with food at all, and that is tight clothing around the abdomen, whether from snug waistbands, cinched belts, or compression garments, which increases external pressure on the stomach and pushes against that same weakened valve from yet another direction entirely. None of this means eliminating every item on that list forever. It means treating your own pattern as information rather than coincidence, and noticing which specific triggers show up most consistently in your own week. For some people, these changes alone are enough to bring real relief. For others, they help, but do not fully resolve the problem, and that is where medical treatment becomes part of a more complete picture, one with more nuance than most people realize. Broadly speaking, there are 3 tiers of treatment, and understanding the difference helps you understand what a physician is actually trying to accomplish, rather than simply which pill they hand you. The first tier includes antacids, which neutralize acid that is already present. They act quickly, which makes them genuinely useful for an isolated, occasional episode, but they do nothing to address the valve itself. The second tier includes H2 blockers, which moderately reduce how much acid the stomach produces in the first place, generally suited to milder, more intermittent symptoms. The third tier includes proton pump inhibitors, which substantially reduce acid production and give an inflamed esophagus genuine time to heal, an option generally reserved for people with frequent symptoms or visible tissue damage. None of these categories are a menu to choose from independently. The right option depends on how often symptoms occur, how severe they are, whether there is visible damage to the esophagus, and what else is happening with a person's broader health, which is exactly why this conversation belongs with a physician rather than a pharmacy shelf. It is worth being direct about one more thing, because responsible information means saying it plainly. Most reflux is manageable and not dangerous. But a small set of symptoms deserve prompt medical attention rather than home remedies or lifestyle adjustments. Difficulty swallowing, food that feels like it is getting stuck, unintentional weight loss, or any sign of bleeding are not situations to wait out. Those warrant a conversation with a doctor that week, not a trial of tea and elevated pillows first. Alongside whatever a physician recommends, never in place of it, there are a few simple habits that tend to support the same underlying mechanism this entire story has been about. Room temperature water on a completely empty stomach shortly after waking, roughly 2 to 3 cups consumed about 30 minutes before breakfast, helps dilute acid that has accumulated overnight and encourages it to move forward through the digestive tract rather than sitting concentrated and waiting for the first food of the day. Basil tea, brewed from a handful of fresh leaves or a spoonful of dried leaves for several minutes, contains compounds with mild anti-inflammatory and digestive calming properties that may help ease irritation and reduce the bloating that adds pressure to an already strained valve. Fennel tea, made from steeped fennel seeds, contains natural compounds associated with reduced gas and abdominal distension, and since a distended stomach is exactly the kind of pressure that pushes a weak valve open, anything that genuinely reduces bloating is indirectly supporting the same mechanism this entire story has circled back to again and again. As for Elena, once the actual source of her cough was identified, the intervention was almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. She raised the head of her bed. She adjusted the timing of her evening meals. She began drinking basil tea after dinner. Her cough was gone within 3 weeks, not because of one dramatic treatment, but because a small, overworked valve was finally given the conditions it needed to do its job again. Reflux is rarely just heartburn. It is a signal that can reach the chest, the throat, the vocal cords, the quality of sleep, and quietly, the energy available for the entire day that follows a disrupted night. The body tends to whisper long before it escalates into something louder, and this condition may be one of the clearest examples of that pattern in modern medicine, a whisper that for many people has been going on for years, in a place nobody thought to listen. If what you experience is occasional, and it responds to the kind of adjustments described here, that is a manageable pattern worth working with starting tonight. If it happens most nights, disrupts your sleep consistently, or arrives with a cough, a hoarse voice, or a lingering lump-out sensation that will not resolve, that pattern is worth bringing to a doctor directly, not as an emergency, but as information your own body has been trying to hand you for some time. Maybe the real lesson here has less to do with any single tea or sleeping position, and more to do with a habit of thinking differently the next time something feels slightly off in a place that does not seem connected to digestion at all. A cough, a tired voice, a restless night with no obvious explanation. The connection is not always there, but often enough it is, and it is worth a second look before quietly filing it away as just something that comes with getting older.